It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to today's guest, someone who is very familiar with the Alliance Halls. Lex Liang is the ultimate multi-hyphen artist, working internationally as a designer, consultant, and stylist in theater, film, fashion, interiors, and special events. He trained as a scenic and costume designer in theatrical production, studies, and art history. Lex has created a career that, when I tell you, it has mapped nearly every branch of the creative world that you can imagine. His work is multidisciplinary and focuses on theatrical production design, as well as design and producing large-scale special events. You've seen Lex's costume design work on the Alliance stage in such productions as The Tall Girls, What I Learned in Paris, Blues from Alabama Sky, Disgraced, Nick's Flamingo Grill, to name just a few. But what makes this designer and artist stand out above the rest, in my opinion, is his unique ability to capture the soul of a character and the spirit of a director's vision. And through his visual artistry, he creates an invitation inside a world of possibilities that an audience just leans in and identifies with it, and they're just swept away. And he does all of this with such grace, such passion, and bold creativity. Please welcome Mr. Lex Liang. Hey, brother.
Hey, Tinashe. It's so nice to be here with you.
So good to see you. I'm so glad that you are here. Where are you right now?
I'm in New York. We're hanging out at my boyfriend's in the Bronx. We're camping out here because, you know, big kitchen for the win. You know,
yes.
So doing well.
So, you know, like many of us, there were several of us who were in the middle of shows that then ended because of COVID. And we are now, I part of us as artists that have passed the, okay, what are we going to do just to survive this moment? And now we're looking to the future and what's next. But before we do that, I want to know, I want to do a look back with you, because I'm curious. I'm curious, one, like what kind of kid you were. Like, I feel like you were the kid that redesigned your family house, styled the relatives. When did you know you wanted to be a designer? How did this all happen for you?
I think you're absolutely right. I was constantly changing things around in the house, particularly my bedroom, sometimes my brother's bedroom, painting my mom's face, anything that I could do to be creative. I mean, like, you know, favorite pastime was wearing mom's shoes, right? But I think while I didn't know exactly what I wanted to pursue, I knew at a very young age, I'd say maybe 9 or 10, that I wanted to be some kind of visual artist and storyteller. Around the same time, my uncle started getting my family tickets to shows that were coming through the LA area, and I was hooked immediately. So I knew I wanted to create visual worlds and tell these stories that I was seeing unfold on stage, but at the same time, I had no idea how to embark on that journey. I knew somebody was responsible for it, but I didn't know formally how to get a foot in the door. I grew up in Southern California, and at the time, the arts were suffering due to severe 80s budget cuts to the arts. And a once thriving arts high school that I went to was relegated to like one studio art class that met the minuscule arts requirements for all students. So I sought other means of creative fulfillment. I would take school assemblies to the next level and create full productions out of them. There were plenty of kids hungry for that kind of artistic outlet. And so I had plenty of folks interested in, you know, my crazy ideas for production. I always reached out to local community theaters to see if there was any way I could volunteer or work without being formally trained. And at 16, designed my first production at a very small community theater in Orange County. It was around that time that I'd immerse myself in any book on theatrical production available to me. I'd spend hours in Barnes & Noble looking at these beautiful coffee table books, thumbing through photos, but without a baseline education in drama, was a little late to the game in terms of classical work and the basic tenets of classical theater. So up until this point, I was at a loss for what to study in school, and was very close to avoiding higher education altogether. But my parents, who knew I wanted to be an artist and cut me off very early so I could prove that I could make money doing it, said I really needed a backup plan. So when looking for schools, very few undergraduate design programs at the time were available. So, but NYU Tisch offered a production design BFA to undergrads, and I put all my eggs in that basket. And, you know, despite a very terrible SAT score and what I'd call a charming portfolio, I'm very grateful to have gotten in. Of course, it was a rude awakening once I got there, being alongside all these theater kids who had this huge baseline knowledge from high school. So I had a lot of catching up to do. But, you know, I've always said that I'm a terrible theater person, but a very determined artist and storyteller.
That's hilarious. When I hear you talk about just how you just initiated so much of your earlier opportunities for yourself, and you created a space for yourself. Did you find that helped you after you graduated step out from the rest of the pack? Because I can imagine graduating in New York, where there just seems to be more artists than projects. Mm-hmm. How did you navigate that? And did you have a plan of action?
I think you had to seek out any opportunity available to you, whether it was formally in theater or production or not. You know, I made a pact with myself very early on when I got here. My first job here actually was shining shoes at Grand Central every morning. And then I worked as a makeup artist. But I was everything that I wanted, that I knew I wanted to pursue production design. And every job that I took was somehow able to give me specific tools or experiences that could influence that journey. You know, I knew that I was not cut out for, you know, waiting tables or making coffee just because I'm totally a klutz. And I knew that any job that I took, I wanted to help in my pursuit of other things. So like I said, shining shoes, makeup art, you know, dealing with clothing, offering up services for alterations, you know, whatever it may be, and really seeking out, casting a very wide net to what those opportunities, you know, to catch some opportunities.
What, I always love to ask this question about people who have been trailblazers in their field, because I know that many of the lessons were learned because you either made a mistake or there was like this daunting project. Were there any early career missteps or lessons learned started to shape the way you wanted to define yourself as an artist?
Absolutely. So when I first came out of school, you know, the hustle is real. I mean, there are a couple of different branches you can take. You know, I knew that I was not going to assist and didn't want to become pigeonholed. And so established myself as a designer right out the gate. And while I think that requires a good bit of confidence and self, you know, sort of sufficiency, and dedication, it also sort of requires, you know, you to be your own cheerleader and to really sort of have a strong ego. But that was also the sort of turning point, doing these smaller productions and then working on bigger productions and ultimately getting this small regional gig as a resident designer. That I learned in a couple of different ways that stopping my pride or ego turning into hubris really early on was key to the success of any designer. As young designers or creative beings, we are often so caught up in our own heads and our own ideas, and somehow we convince ourselves that we know best or ours is the right answer. And I learned very quickly that this was a losing game plan and not at all how our industry works. And looking back, I can honestly say I'm embarrassed by some of my early interactions with directors and fellow collaborators because I thought I knew best at 17, mind you. So, you know, just like during the year I took off school, I was actually requested to take a year off of school after my freshman year. But I ate my body weight in humble pie and really started listening and collaborating and therefore really learning. And there's an acronym actually for good collaboration that I, you know, developed a long time ago, but sort of formalized when I've taught classes in the past, and that's ART, ARRT. Active listening, respect, responsiveness, and tact. And I built my entire
Yeah,
career on
I
those
mean,
tenets.
it is such, I mean, I always said that costume design, and we've talked about this because I've worked with you as both an actor and as a director. And costume design, it's just so intimate because as an actor, I am wearing your creative vision. And so I'm curious about how you find that balance between the conversations you have with actors who have a clear idea of who they are, and then the vision of a director who is looking at the whole picture. And then how do you then fit in also in the story to make sure your through line of vision is clear, but you are those dots?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would say that of all the disciplines, it's indeed the most intimate, and that's one aspect I love most about the job as a costume designer. You have to earn the trust of not only your director and collaborators, but unlike other disciplines, actors have to really trust you, and you have to. A large part of your job is out the gate earning that trust. My interpretation of a character's costume is based on my read of the project and working with the director and that director's concept. But it's still just that. It's my interpretation. I'm not wearing the clothes. I'm not wearing the costume. I can't do the job that the performer has to do. And so much of my job is ensuring that not only can they do their job well, but it feels right to them. It doesn't hinder their performance at all. It doesn't do anyone any favors if an actor hates their costume or disagrees with, your style choices. Seasoned performers know that a costume reflects their character, not their own personal tastes. So they tend to be a little bit more open to that type of stylistic collaboration. But this is a conversation that has to be had between a performer and a costume designer. And as you know, I start every first fitting with a character chat with the performer. I open up that discussion. I say, here are my designs. This is my research. This is my interpretation of your role based on our director's concepts. And, I always want to offer that opportunity for suggestion and collaboration because my interpretation of the character has to be in line with theirs. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Sometimes there are disagreements, but I find if you do your homework and really do it, like often digging deeper into the character's backstory than even the actor does, you can come to an agreement if you both can justify your choices. You also have to respect the performer. They are at their most vulnerable in the fitting room and on stage. So it's imperative that you listen to what they're saying. Don't yab them to death, but really listen to what they're saying. It might be a decision that they might change their mind. They might discover things in the rehearsal process that they weren't thinking about. And so you have to retain some amount of flexibility, but really always listen to those reports, check in with the stage manager. Ultimately, it's much easier for me to adjust a design than for an actor to suffer through a design for 2 hours every night. And the last thing that you want to do is find yourself in a position where you find out through the grapevine, like, oh, this person didn't like it. You've got to be able to read that character, that actor's body language, and really make sure that the fitting room is a safe space for them to give you all of their, insecurities. Make it a safe space that you can share ideas, and there aren't any right or wrong answers. And to not, I always tell students I've taught in the past, be prepared to tear up the sketch, because it's not about the sketch. The sketch is a tool. And the real art is ultimately the production as a whole. In order to get there, you've got to work alongside all these other collaborators.
And it's also so specific to the artist that you're working with on that play. I mean, you could have done this same production somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I think I've got ice cream truck running behind my back of my house. But you could have done the same production with another cast, and you can't just so much about paying attention to what the vessel is that's telling the story and what's the clearest pathway to do it.
Well, I worked with you on Disgraced, for instance, and we, really had a lot of adjustments based on the initial interpretation of the character. And things that made you feel particularly strong and confident in that role. And we made those necessary adjustments. Cut to, 2 years later, I did the show again with a completely different, The character was the same, but the actor's approach was very different. And so, you know, you sort of need to wipe that slate clean. And every project is its own creature, and you sort of have to tend to it in that
I love
unique
that
way.
you brought up Disgraced, because that, I wonder if, like, when you're doing a show like maybe Shakespeare in Love, where there's all these costume changes and you can tell stories about past and, you know, who these people are, you can tell that visual story over this period of time, as opposed to Disgrace, which 80-minute period. In the case of Jory, the character that I played, one costume, yet you had to like just condense all of her story and who she is and her identity, her status in that
And
one
we don't
outfit.
get director's notes, you know, like we have one shot to give as much information as possible about each character to an audience over, you know, 120 minutes or whatever. And so each choice in that specific situation is key, right? So making sure that the bag is right, the shoes are right, you know, the cut is right. And again, making sure that the actor feels as strong as possible.
I want to just shift gears a little bit, because I feel like I could talk about every show in costumes with you, because the one thing that I know about you is that you always know you're watching Lex production, because it is exquisite. It's so beautifully tailored and it is built for that actor. And I love you for that. But I want to talk about set design. You traffic really seamlessly between the two, and oftentimes you are wearing both hats. Talk to me about, like, what is exciting about being able to be both costume designer and set designer. Yeah, just what is that process?
I have what I like to very affectionately call creative ADD. And that creative ADD can be a needy mistress. I find that, you know, theatrical design has always been my first love. And I never knew until I got to college that scenic design and costume design separately. Like I always thought of it as sort of scenography, because some of my earliest idols were these sort of great British designers, and that's how it's done over there. But I actually think I'm at my best when I do both scenic and costume design, particularly if I'm doing something like our production at Cleveland Playhouse of Shakespeare in Love, where it's highly stylized and it's like kind of like what I call a period mashup. As a costume designer, I'm always asking myself, you know, where does this character live? How does this character live? How does the character's environment affect their daily dress and style? You know, what are some of the environmental triggers that might influence this character and how they present themselves? So whether or not I'm formally designing scenery, I'm always thinking about it. And I find that creating a cohesive overall aesthetic, particularly in one of those period mashup productions, is much easier when I'm designing both or working very closely with a colleague, so that the design is really cohesive and the overall aesthetic of the show is really tight. With specific regard to scenery, outside of what the show or the story environments must be, I like to abstractly think about space and the environments, you know, much like I would think about costumes and how a specific character might have their own unique individual style. I love a good, beautifully curated living room set, but like, what makes that set theatrical? Where's the poetry in that design? And that's what sets scenic designers apart from historical architects. And I think it's important to find the poetry in every design, regardless of the design discipline.
Yeah, I mean, as a director, I feel like, you know, every designer is so important on your team as you're putting those puzzles together. But there is something very anchoring about knowing, you know, having that relationship with your set designer, because the set is, for me, it's the first, for many people, it's the first experience with the play that our audience has.
Where are we?
When they watch. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when you get a script, what is the first thing you do? How do you stay inspired? What are the clues you look for? What are the things you ask yourself?
The first time I read the script is truly to get the plot, particularly if it's a new production. And then I really start knowing that story. I start asking myself questions, you know, in Nix. where are these people from? Why this abandoned place? What might that place have looked like? You know, what background or what history has, you know, inspired these particular characters? And I start writing those questions down, and really I start immersing myself in imagery of the period, spaces that might be inspiring to me, period clothing that might set off some sort of, you know, snowball effect. But I really start just sort of mentally collaging anything and everything. There are no wrong answers at this time. And then having sort of, you know, inundated my brain with some of this outside imagery and some of this research material, and take another read, imagining those images, and somehow at some point something will click. And I always call it kind of the aha moment. And also, I think, you know, one of the things that I love asking my director right out the gate, before we even start talking specifically about the details of the plot or the script, is, you know, why do you want to direct this? And I think that's really important to think about too, because, you know, whether you're doing Romeo and Juliet or you're doing Christmas Carol, each director has their own take on it, whether it's been, you know, produced a million times, and you want to make sure that you are honoring that director's concept. And that everything that you do, every choice you're making, can somehow anchor to that concept. And that it could be as simple as, I want it to be as period specific as possible. I really want an audience to experience what the character's experiencing, and be looking like they're watching a historical film or something. You know, it could be as simple as that. Or, you know, I really want the characters to empathize with Chi-Chi's flight, for instance, from Nick's Flamingo Grill. And how do you specifically engage them with that story? And then you sort of have a roadmap as to, like, okay, what are the high points that I want to accentuate so that I can draw attention to this specific story element that speaks to the concept that the director has, without being an overbearing design. No show is about one discipline. And I think if there are standouts like that, there are certainly moments, you know, there are moments that each discipline should do their share of the heavy lifting. But I think, you know, you can't design something just for the sake of it being, you know, a fantastic outfit. It's got to feed that story, and it's got to feed that concept. And so anything that sort of can inspire that, I think is the first thing I want to talk to the director about. You know, what's the concept? What's important to you? What experience do you want the audience to have? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, just that that cohesiveness of vision. What is also so clear about that, I think, is that then it also just helps guide the audience's experience. And then I can see that vision in the type of material that you choose, weight of the material. I was thinking back about when we did Blues for an Alabama Sky, and I had such costume jealousy for everything else that Crystal Fox was wearing, because her clothes were so fabulous. And I had these really constraining, stiff, coarse,
very conservative.
Very conservative. But it just, you know, the minute that I would put those clothes on every night, I just knew exactly who Dia was, you know, and it was many conversations we had, but also her flowering during it, and how then my clothes got softer and looser and I could move more in it. And just the journey of that was so clear to me.
You know, anecdotally, I remember so specifically, I think it's probably one of my favorite costumes, both in execution. Julie Kennedy did such a beautiful job on it, and also just the way we got there. But we were in the fitting room together, and something wasn't right about that olive dress. It fit you. It was right for the character. You looked fabulous in that dress, but there was something that your body language, and I remember you saying something about, you know, like, yeah, I'm a little short-statured. I feel like at this point she should feel sort of strong in her femininity and stuff. And but you know, you hadn't said anything was wrong with the dress, but you know, your body language said something needed tweaking. And sure enough, we raised that waistline just a little bit, and it was like perfection. And you could see the whole like weight of your body shifted, and like you grounded that character. And that was, you know, that's the magic of the fitting room to me. And that's the magic of approaching it with a collaborative spirit, knowing that, yes, the dress looked exactly like the dang sketch, but it didn't fit the actor exactly as she needed it to fit. And so we made those adjustments to the proportions, and it was fabulous.
I love that experience and all the ones that we've had together. Just a quick note for our Zoomers. I'm going to do 1 or 2 more questions with Lex, and then please go ahead and raise your hand so that we can open up this conversation for all of you guys to jump in. We were talking about just that intimacy of being in the fitting room, and we know that given everything that's going on right now, a lot of changes are happening, and we're all having to be really nimble and flexible and navigate what our medium is, how we're going to be able to interact with each other. I'm curious on a couple things. One is, how are you staying creative and inspired right now? And what kind of work are you excited to get back to doing, or projects that you want to work on when you're able to?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, it took a global pandemic for me to sort of like be still for a little bit and not jump around and not overload the work, because I love it so much. So that actually has been really nice. I've taken a lot of creative fulfillment out of cooking these very extravagant, bizarre meals. You know, that you know, is another outlet. I have friends who are having babies at this time, which I can't imagine what that's like, but I've really enjoyed doing a lot of counted cross stitching, because it's both creative and mindless at the same time. So really finding any sort of fulfillment from the smallest of things, I think, you know, I'm very grateful for, and being very grateful to be able to do. As we move forward, to be honest, I think the process will need to be much the same just because of the nature of what we do. I think the tools might evolve. Perhaps, you know, we'll have more digital remote meetings and fittings. I mean, leading up to this point, there were often times I needed to be in multiple cities at once for fittings, and it's just physically impossible. So, you know, we often do remote fittings anyway, and I hate them. As I learned so much engaging with performers in person and with the costume team in person, but it's sometimes a necessary evil. And I've been lucky enough to build an amazing relationship with the Alliance Shop, for instance, and we've had very successful remote fittings in the past. But that's because over the years, we've developed a really tight shorthand. And I think post-COVID, we'll see a lot more remote fittings and meetings, but I think overall the whole system will need reevaluating, certainly until there's a vaccine that gives folks security and confidence to be, you know, in those intimate quarters with each other, and letting somebody, you know, not only, you know, take all your measurements and being up in your face, you know, God forbid you need a wig bubble done. You know, but I think those changes, it's hard to tell what changes will be implemented and what will in fact be successful until we start really trying.
Yeah, I think that I hope that we just, some of the things that we steal forward are things like these Zoom calls where we can share more of our art with more people, and that we just open up those doors of access more. But I know we can never get rid of that one-on-one interaction that is the very essence of what we do, at least in the theater.
Sure. And I think, you know, I think that not to sound like a cliche, but I think it's so important for, despite whatever, you know, everybody has a different sort of situation going on right now. But what we can do is try. I think it's so important. You know, that saying, like, if you fake a smile long enough, you'll start smiling and giggling, right? I think it's really important to seek out any speck of anything that you can be grateful for. So for instance, would I love to be sitting across from you, having a tea and chatting a concept for a show you're directing? Absolutely. I'd love to be in a fitting room with you, but you know, we can't. And because we can't, and because of the situation, you know, we're able to have this conversation, which, you know, we get to learn a little bit about each other that we wouldn't have been able to talk about more on a more personal level, because we're not speaking show specific stuff right now. You know, we're talking about process and background and things that make us not only artists but human. And I think it's really important to sort of cultivate those practices.
I love that you say that, because it is about the human story. And speaking about that, I want to talk about diversity in our industry.
Great.
You know, I mean, let's be real, right? Just specifically in the design field, where people of color and women and trans or non-binary people are just so poorly represented. We've been talking about how designers have this intimate relationship with the director and with actors. And for me, that means that there needs to be cultural competency, right? Just an understanding of why the actors relate to a story just as much as their characters do. I think that's key. I'm curious, in your journey, in your career, where have you overcome or bumped up against that? And do you think we're getting better?
I think first and foremost, for a long time, I thought, woefully unprepared to go into this theater business. I didn't have the background that some of my colleagues who went to an arts magnet high school or, went to. I don't have a master's degree. What my sort of grounding element was, you've got to have a real life to feed your artistic life. And I think that when you talk about folks who have a strict theater, they know every word of Shakespeare, they know all of these things and, whatever. You're also talking about an art form that we in this country certainly have been exposed to, that is very, very white. It is very Western European. And I think not having been inundated with that from a young age, I have, and I think that that's turning around now, and I'm so grateful to see that. But I was always hungry for a new, interesting story, or production or play. And I think the first rule then is to look beyond theater. Diversity and inclusivity are not specific to theater and shouldn't be. And I think what we're seeing that change a little bit. It feels like as soon as we're halfway up the mountain, something happens and the whole thing crumbles beneath us. But thankfully in our industry, the ability to engage and connect with folks of different backgrounds is much more accessible than perhaps in other industries. So we should take advantage of that. Take the time and connect to folks who have a different background than yourself. Next is, be accurate. And this is something that I think is really important to me. As a costume designer, do the work of learning who your cast is and accurately represent them in renderings. It seems so simple, but if you are a woman of color playing a role and see a costume sketch of a white woman, that's a problem. And it's incredibly disrespectful, aside from being completely inaccurate. That being said, we often don't get our cast lists until after our designs are due. So in that case, create diversity in the sketches. There's no reason why you can't, in what you're presenting, be diverse. Don't just reach for that flesh toned marker. Who's that color anyway, really? Make the series of sketches diverse. And even if the actor doesn't look like the sketch, the overall representation should reflect that of a diverse cast. And again, speak to the actors and really listen to them. If you're designing a head wrap for a character and have never wrapped your head in your life, this guy, do some research, but then also talk to the actor, check your ego, and open yourself up to those experiences. It's the only way we're going to start being able to truthfully engage with each other and hopefully, continue, I think, this very, very important work.
I love that you say that. And I remember the first time being in a rehearsal space and seeing renderings that had that were diverse, and I felt seen. And it just, you don't know the impact of that choice on other folk that are in the room, and how you can just encourage them to be brave and feel like they're supposed to be there. So thank you.
And confident in their role.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, being an actor, period, but I can't imagine walking into that design presentation or something and already feeling nervous or anxious and being incredibly vulnerable, and then not being represented in the sketch that's supposed to be you. I think that would be incredibly deflating, you know, and I think it happens all the time. And so I think if you can't be specific, you know, make sure that you're being inclusive. Because then, you know, if Karen looks at her sketch and, you know, she's a Latinx woman or whatever, fine. But if Tinashe sees her sketch and, you know, she looks more like Karen, at least folks are represented across the board, you know, and there's that balance that should be there.
Hey, we have a question from Ivan.
Great.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, Ivan.
Hi, Lex. How are you? Hi, Tinashe.
Hey.
I think I'm unmuted, right?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So my thought was maybe you could talk a little bit about the current environment. Is got some of our grads that are, or students that are graduating soon, you know, a little nervous. So perhaps you could talk about applying your design skills to other venues or disciplines other than theater or film.
Sure.
Maybe, you know, how you've been able to spread out your career to other areas.
So, you know, I started a company called LDC Design about 10 years ago, and you know, at the time, if I'm being completely honest, was just a way to cast a wider net. I didn't want to, outside of the theater world, be just seen as a theater designer. I think that as you know, creative artists, we're all capable of a multitude of different disciplines. And so, of course, in our theatrical world, I wanted to establish myself as a scenic and costume designer. But, you know, very few people coming out of school certainly work from show to show to show to show and are able to pay the bills and pay off the student loans, et cetera. And so I thought by casting a wider net and to really sort of feed this, like I said, creative ADD that I've always felt, I wanted to pursue other things that, again, would allow me to develop my skills as a theatrical designer, or vice versa. Let me utilize the skills that I have as a theatrical designer and pursue other things that would be both creatively and financially fulfilling. You know, you really sort of, again, want to learn from everything that's available around you, and not just, you know, be so myopic about, you know, the discipline because that's the title that you currently have, or that's a title that you're working towards. You know, what inspires you to be a better artist all the way around, you know? And as a theater designer just starting out, as much as I hustled, I wasn't working nonstop with projects. So I cast a much larger net and, you know, again, sought out opportunities, places elsewhere, doing interiors, any little project that people would throw my way. Starting with, you know, a small cafe in Jersey City that I heard somebody was opening, and I asked if I could, you know, work on it as an interior designer. You know, and that led to designing bespoke furniture, which then led to more interiors, which then led to a connection with marketing agency. And then, you know, in the last 10 years, we've done all these big experiential event designs, which ultimately is all theater. You know, a client is a director. You know, your different vendors are your shop. So, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a board meeting. You know, I won't name any corporations, but some big corporations are pitching a creative deck to a client, and they're bowled over by how cohesive and thoughtful, you know, our design is, and how each element is thought through. And but that's what we do as theater artists. You know, we do the research and we do the concepting, and we have those collaborative moments. And it's great to be able to utilize those skills in a variety of ways. So for those folks who are, you know, a little discouraged by the current state of the world, don't lose hope. You know, we will, of course, be back, but don't be discouraged, you know, and start making your own opportunities. I mean, now is the time to really sort of be as creative as possible, truly.
That is so great. There was another question that came in that I think you answered it, but it was from Tessie. And she said, I would love to know if you have any recommendations for students' portfolio who don't have any work credit yet, and self-taught or personal experience a minus in our resume? I mean, that's how you started.
It's how we all start. And Oh man. Oh man, you're really sort of making me jog back.
We all walk down that hustle road where, you lead in with your potential and not because it's on your resume.
I think you lead in with your potential. Be very careful not to be pretentious. Be confident, but don't be cocky. I think it's really important to be able to set up that website. And here's what I would suggest, right? Because I remember having this whole thing, because way back in the day when I was getting started, websites weren't really a thing, right? And so the way you marketed yourself was truly word of mouth, or cold calling and all of this stuff. Putting paper portfolios, and you sort of like drop the book on a Starbucks table. Set up a website. Don't fret about the tabs or the number of projects. Put your best work forward. And really, I have a buddy of mine who is so lacking in that anxiety, where he will cold call theaters to direct shows. He will email, and he does so with such graciousness that nobody would ever find him annoying, right? So I think half of our job in any design discipline is really psychology, figuring out what the director is really trying to say, figuring out what that actor really means in that fitting room. But ultimately all you can do is put your best work forward, however much that work is, whatever that work may be. If you've got a website address, fantastic. Make it just a landing page with your name, what you do, your contact information, and a beautiful collage of your best pieces. And start just sending emails out to folks, and just I'd love it if you took a look at my, my landing page, my website, whatever. Don't fret about the numbers of productions; those will come.
Yeah, I think that we're in this really great opportunity right now for early career artists to get the attention of a lot of people that they might otherwise not get. And it sounds like, yes, no, go.
All right. One thing I want to add, is I think that so many theater artists, and myself included for a long time, really wanted to see that, like, here's the sketch, here's the finished product, they look the same, right? But that so rarely is the case. I mean, after a while, I think once you've established your career, and really sort of gained the trust of your collaborators, you'll be able to go page to stage, and that's a wonderful thing, but not all the time. And I think that people are so interested in seeing process. So if you've got paper projects that you're really proud of, put your first thumbnail up there, and then put the edits that you've made up there, or your red lines on drafting, and then show that you are both collaborative and an eager learner, and willing to do the work. And I think that will speak a lot to future employers and collaborators.
I love that. Jack Sharp has a question for us. Hey, Jack.
Hey, Jack.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Fire.
Oh, cool. So you're talking about earlier, you said you called it creative ADD. So I was wondering, how do you keep, when you're making designs, and even if you have a finished design, how do you keep yourself from like trusting that you made the right choices and not like, oh, I could do this instead, or this could be a better idea?
Well, that's a great question, because I think a lot of designers have a problem making decisions because there's really no right answer. There can certainly be a lot of wrong answers depending on the question or the task at hand. But I think that it's really important to not be married to any one idea, but to make confident decisions. So, if you're selecting a fabric for a dress, first of all, know that not one costume is ever going to make or break your career. The wallpaper selection in your set is never going to make or break your career. All of those choices are ones that you have to make, and with help from collaborators, but ultimately it comes down to you to pull the trigger. What I would say is streamline the process. Make sure that you've got, for instance, when I have my assistants go swatching, for instance, I always say, limit me to like 6 options, because, and often, and do as much objective work as possible. So for instance, on fabric, is this appropriate for the period? Does this color tell the story? You know, how does it wear in terms of wardrobe? We've got to do this thing 8 times a week and, you know, for 3 months or whatever, you know, like all of those things. So if you're at a crossroads for that type of decision making, do the objective stuff first, and then make a choice, pull the trigger, you know, and if you, I think a lot of times, you know, there are things that get scrapped, for instance, and I work on a lot of projects and some ideas don't come to fruition, log them away, make a little blurb about it. I have a file on my computer, actually, that's unrealized ideas. And it's just like, sometimes they're blurbs, sometimes it's a research image that really inspired me that never got used, or that idea didn't come to fruition. You know, just keep I have a huge sort of back catalog of stuff, right? That hopefully will one day see the light of day, but if it doesn't, and it's still inspiring. But I would also say, you know, don't be afraid to make the decision. You know, and I think I know that, you know, the further along you get in your career, the more confident those decision-making skills will be. But, you know, as you sort of embark on new projects, do the objective stuff first and then make the decision.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.
You know, I love that you had said that one of the things that this pandemic brought on was it forced you just to sit still for a bit. So many of us as artists, you know, we feel like once we start getting work, we can't say no. We have to keep going, keep going, keep going. And sometimes you just really drain that creative pool. When you are at the height of like trying to balance everything and you've just got so many projects going on, how do you maintain that balance and have a healthy personal life and as well as a healthy, you know, work life? You're not just giving just to be working.
I think that's a very good question. I don't know that I have the definitive answer because I'm still sorting that out myself. But I think that you know, for us creative folks, I think having structure can seem like a hindrance. But I would implore you to look at structure as a tool. So, you know, at the height of me traveling or, you know, juggling 5 or 6 shows or something like that, being really disciplined about dates is very important. I can't stress this enough too. A due date isn't a suggestion, right? So a due date, whether it's a preliminary date, like design date, a final design date, a meeting, you know, and so I really, again, it comes down to because we deal in such subjective terms all the time, in such creative terms, find the objectivity and structure yourself that way. So I would say, okay, these deadlines are due, you know, first. So I'm going to work on that first. If I need to wake up at 5 so that I can get everything done by 6 o'clock so that I can have dinner with my boyfriend or whatever, or see my friends or, you know, have a life outside of the theater. It's really important to build that structure. And everybody's different, right? Like, so I can do a very early day to a very late night or whatever. Some people are going to need a different type of structural foundation for that sort of time management. But really, I think harnessing your time management, getting organized and prioritizing is really key to sort of keeping, and it doesn't work all the time. Let me tell you. But I will say, I've also, you know, and Tinashe, you'll know as a director, like you depend on your team, collaborative, you know, that the creative spirit, those creative juices, sounding board stuff. And I have plenty of director friends, you know, who will either email, call, or text, you know, randomly about the project. And I've had to say, you know, with love and respect, that those dates aren't due till 2 weeks from now, and I've got something else, but I promise you, as soon as that's done, you will have all my attention. And I think that all you can do is be honest at that point. Everybody knows that we're all juggling multiple projects, but it doesn't do anybody any favors if you are just trying to keep balls in the air all the time and not actually doing the work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Did you have mentors, or was there somebody, is there somebody in your career that is a sounding board for you or you looked up to, and what advice did they give?
I've had lots of mentors. I mean, like in a way, you know, I would say, you know, like as any creative person at any level of their career, you know, like I have a great deal of imposter syndrome. And I feel that any collaborator I've ever had, any colleague truly is a mentor in a way. And each project is almost a masterclass, whether it's in that specific period research or it's a masterclass in how graciously a director deals with some terrible situation in the rehearsal room, or you know, whatever the case may be. But like, I feel like everybody can be a mentor to anybody else, and that's certainly how I've sort of traversed my career. Is everybody that I've worked with, I sort of see as somebody I can learn from, and I can, and you know, again, I think when you open yourself up, you know, to humility and listening, you can learn a lot from the people that you never would have thought that you're going to learn lessons from. So I think it's important to sort of seek that mentorship wherever you can get it. I didn't have any former sort of, in the classical sense, mentors. I had a great costume professor at NYU, and we became very, very close friends. She's unfortunately has passed. But you know, one of the things that I loved most was having conversation with her, not necessarily about theater, but just about life and our approach to things, and things that inspire us. So I think that anybody can be a mentor, and we should all try to be mentors to somebody.
I agree. I feel that one of the things that I love being in a rehearsal space is just that opportunity to learn. And it's this conveyor belt, right? And it just is this, you know, feeding yourself and then and feeding, you know, others in conversation, and just exploring what are the possibilities. So I feel like if we make decisions that are only going to work for this production, we're lesser for it. But if we make bigger discoveries that we can then take on to the next show and the next, it feels like we are fertilizing our theatrical ecosystem that's going to benefit others.
And taking it to the next level and continuing to evolve.
Sydney, sorry, I see you, your hand up, Sydney Everett.
Yes, hi.
Hey, Sydney.
So my question was about, you mentioned earlier this thing about creating an open fitting room and creating a space where the actor really feels like they can communicate and you really feel like you can communicate. I know in the past in my school we've had issues with feeling like everybody felt comfortable in the space. What do you do to try and make that space more comfortable and make everybody feel like they have a right to like have a say in what they're wearing or those kinds of things?
Great question, Sydney. I will start by saying I don't feel that everyone necessarily has should have an opportunity to give input at any given time. So I think it's really important to communicate to the folks in the fitting room, whether that is your costume shop supervisor, the drapers, you know, any people involved in the fitting, an assistant, that you know, this is how I want to run this fitting. I would like to do 5 minutes of a character consult. If we need to do more, we'll schedule them to come back. If you're concerned that there's, particularly in an academic setting, right, at that point, everybody's like bursting with ideas and everybody wants to share, and there's less of a formality. But I would encourage you, you know, like I'm assuming that you're a costume designer.
Yes.
So, you know, when you run a fitting, and it's tricky, and you sort of have to always be able to read the room and read the folks that you're working with. But you know, for somebody like me, when I go from theater to theater, it's your house, your rules, right? Once you establish that mutual respect, and you ask the shop manager or the drapers how they want things to go, with, you know, away from the actor, obviously, then be very clear and say, you know, I want to start with this conversation. I would appreciate that nobody else give feedback at this time, because it's really important. Or have the fitting room closed off so that you and the actor can converse one-on-one. And then once you guys have that, establish that rapport and establish that trust, open the fitting room back up and get started. And then, you know, just make sure that all of that information that you shared intimately with that actor, all that information is heard, and that there's a way to utilize that information. And there's always going to be a time when somebody offers up a suggestion or an idea, and their timing isn't right or their tact isn't right. And all you have to do is say, thanks for your suggestion, we're going to move on, or thanks for your suggestion, that's it. And so I don't think that you have to engage with any sort of like tit for tatting, but I do think that, it's really important that you establish what your protocol is as the designer. And so really sort of establish those ground rules out the gate, and I don't think you should have any problems.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question if anybody has another question. I was thinking, Lex, that sometimes when I look back at it, when I'm faced with the decision as a director, a choice that we need to make, invest in, I'm oftentimes driven either by my heart, or I'm driven by talent or creativity, or I'm driven by instinct. And I'm curious which one of those, your heart, talent, or instinct, which one usually do you privilege? Where have you found?
Oh man, I think it depends on a project, because there are some, and it really depends on your collaborators. I think that there's, particularly when you've worked with a collaborator more than once, you sort of become sort of simpatico in that if this is a gut response that they're having, and then therefore you can have a gut response, or sometimes you need to temper that gut response with a little bit more cerebral thinking. For instance, Susan Booth, let's say, who I love working with, and she has been nothing but kind to me and generous at the Alliance. She is one of the most hyper intelligent people I've ever met, and can be so incredibly cerebral about each of the choices that you present. And so it's really our job to sort of gauge what that collaborator needs so that they can deliver to you what you need. And so if that's, here, I did this research, this is a fact, this is a fact, this is a fact, I think this choice speaks to that, then, and you present that, then I think that, you've sort of made your argument. And there are times that you're like, I really feel like this, this, and this. And if you can back it up with stuff in the script, if you can back it up with, a plot point or something, then I think that that's just as valid. But I think it depends project to project, because there have definitely been times where I'm like, no, this is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way it's historically been done. And, we're not going to reinvent this architectural style, or we're not going to reinvent the cut of this dress. It didn't exist in this decade. And then letting yourself be a little freer to sort of create a little gray area.
What I love about you, Lex, is that you show up your full self every day, and no matter if you've been on an 8-hour flight, or you're juggling several projects, but when you are in a space, you are so committed and present, and it is such a gift as a director, as an actor. And I am so grateful for this conversation. I know we're going to come out of this, and what our plan, our future is going to be. I hope that those of you that have been listening in feel really inspired that your work has not been put on ice. You are not hibernating right now. Just keep doing the work. Lex is a perfect example of that.
Well, I appreciate you. I adore you, Tinashe. This has been super fun. And, what you said, I think, is really important to sort of end with, particularly for those young designers out there. When we're back, and we will be, whether it's theater, live events, or other creative outlets, we will be back. Show up. If you take on a job, right? We're all juggling a lot of things, but if you're in tech for that show, you're in tech for that show. You're not off taking a meeting for something else. I know it's really hard, and it's very tempting to sort of multitask, but if you can't fully focus on the project at hand, don't take it. That means you're overbooked.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And I would now like to say thank you, Lex. Stay safe. We will see you again soon.